sapphire crystal, a piece of metal. But look closely at what you're actually buying. A Rolex can cost $20,000. A mechanical movement made from hundreds of tiny components, materials and manufacturing that, by themselves, don't come close to explaining a $20,000 price tag. And that's where the story gets interesting. Because if the physical watch doesn't cost anywhere near $20,000 to make, what exactly are customers paying for? The obvious answer is craftsmanship. Rolex movements are engineered, tested, assembled, and finished to extremely high standards. But craftsmanship alone doesn't explain why one watch can command several times the price of another watch that performs the same basic function. Both tell time. Both sit on your wrist. Yet one can cost as much as a car. So perhaps Rolex isn't really selling timekeeping at all. It's selling something much harder to manufacture: trust, recognition, exclusivity, history, and the feeling that owning the object says something about you. And once you understand that, the $20,000 price tag starts to look less like a manufacturing calculation and more like a carefully constructed economic system. But that raises an even bigger question. If Rolex could sell more watches, why doesn't it simply do exactly that? Because in luxury, sometimes the most valuable thing a company can sell is something it refuses to make easy to get. A watch has one obvious job: tell you the time. And if that were the only thing that mattered, Rolex would have a serious problem. A basic quartz watch can perform that job for a tiny fraction of the price. Modern smartphones can tell you the exact time, set alarms, track time zones, and synchronize automatically. In pure technological terms, mechanical watches are almost absurdly inefficient. Instead of using inexpensive electronics, they rely on hundreds of precisely engineered components assembled into a miniature machine that must be wound or powered by movement. None of this makes the Rolex tell time dramatically better. In fact, the more technology advances, the harder it becomes to justify an expensive mechanical watch through functionality alone. So why would someone spend $10,000, $20,000, or even more on something that performs a task their phone already does for free? The answer lies in a distinction that explains almost every luxury business: functional value versus perceived value. Functional value comes from what a product does. A refrigerator keeps food cold. Car transports you. A watch tells time. Perceived value comes from what the product represents. And luxury companies operate largely in that second world. When a customer buys a Rolex, they aren't simply purchasing a device for measuring hours and minutes. They're buying craftsmanship, heritage, recognition, exclusivity, and a symbol that other people can immediately understand. That changes the economic equation completely. Because once the product stops competing on what it does, the real competition becomes what people believe it means. And that is where Rolex's business becomes far more interesting than watchmaking. A Rolex becomes valuable for a reason that has very little to do with measuring time. It tells people something about the person wearing it. Luxury products often function as signals. They communicate information without requiring an explanation. A designer handbag can suggest taste. A sports car can suggest wealth or ambition. And a Rolex can suggest achievement, success, and financial security. That doesn't mean every Rolex owner is trying to impress someone. But the symbolism exists whether the owner consciously thinks about it or not. The important part is that Rolex is recognizable. The crown logo, the distinctive case designs, the familiar bracelet, and decades of cultural exposure have made the brand instantly legible. You don't need to understand mechanical movements to recognize a Rolex on someone's wrist. And that recognition creates economic value. Imagine two watches that perform almost identically. One is virtually unknown. The other is immediately associated with wealth and achievement. Technically, they may accomplish the same task. Psychologically, they are completely different products. This is how status goods behave. People aren't necessarily paying more because the product provides proportionally more utility. They're paying because ownership changes what the product represents, and sometimes how the owner believes they are perceived. The watch becomes part of an identity. For one person, it might represent a promotion after years of work. For another, a business milestone. For someone else, it may simply represent belonging to a particular world. But there is a catch. Status cannot be created simply by printing a famous logo onto an expensive object. People have to believe the symbol means something, and that belief had to be built over decades. Rolex did not become a luxury brand simply by making an expensive watch and waiting for people to notice. The reputation was built over decades. From its early development, Rolex placed enormous emphasis on reliability, precision, durability, and technical credibility. That mattered because a luxury claim is much easier to believe when the product has already proven itself in the real world. Rolex pursued certifications, performance achievements, and engineering milestones that helped establish the idea that these watches were not merely decorative objects. They were instruments designed to perform under demanding conditions. Then came the environments where failure was not an option: exploration, diving, aviation, mountaineering, competitive sports, extreme conditions. Every successful use created another story. And stories are incredibly valuable in luxury markets. Customer doesn't necessarily remember the technical details of a movement, but they may remember that Rolex was associated with explorers, divers, athletes, pilots, and people operating at the limits of human performance. That connection slowly changed what the watch represented. It wasn't just a machine for measuring time. It became a symbol of reliability under pressure, achievement, adventure, and personal success. This distinction is important because luxury brands rarely sell only physical products. They sell the accumulated meaning surrounding those products. Rolex spent decades building that meaning before it could command the prices it does today. But reputation alone has a weakness. If everyone could walk into a store tomorrow, buy any Rolex they wanted, and leave with one, some of that exclusivity would disappear. The more people have access to something, the less powerful its status signal can become. And this is where the economics of Rolex become especially interesting. Because after building extraordinary demand, the next question was not simply how to sell more watches. And once scarcity enters the equation, price starts behaving very differently. In most businesses, the logic is simple. If customers want more of your product, make more of it. More production means more sales, more revenue, and ideally, more profit. But luxury businesses operate under a strange economic constraint. Sometimes, giving customers exactly what they want can weaken the thing they want. Rolex exists inside that paradox. The company produces watches at enormous scale compared with many high-end mechanical watchmakers, yet demand for certain models can still exceed readily available supply through authorized channels. Distribution is tightly controlled, and customers may encounter long waits or limited availability for particularly desirable references. That creates something more valuable than a product sitting on a shelf: anticipation. When something is immediately available to everyone, it can feel ordinary. But when people have to search for it, wait for it, or prove themselves as a customer, the product can begin to feel more important. Psychologists understand this effect well. Scarcity creates urgency because people naturally place greater value on opportunities that appear limited. But not all scarcity is the same. Some scarcity comes from genuine production constraints. Manufacturing a complex mechanical watch requires time, skilled labor, quality control, and specialized components. Some comes from distribution decisions and how inventory reaches the market. And some is perceived scarcity, the feeling that obtaining the product is difficult, even when the broader market contains thousands of examples. That perception matters enormously. Customer who waits months for a watch may value it differently from someone who could have purchased the same watch instantly. The wait itself becomes part of the experience. It also creates social proof. If other people are waiting for the same product, that suggests the product must be desirable. But scarcity creates a dangerous question for Rolex. What happens when customers stop seeing limited availability as desirable and start seeing it simply as frustrating? The answer depends on something far more powerful than supply. It depends on whether the brand can make people believe that waiting is worth it. But scarcity becomes much more powerful when a company controls the environment surrounding the product. Rolex doesn't simply manufacture a watch and send it into the world like an ordinary consumer good. Its distribution, retail presentation, servicing, and authentication all contribute to the experience surrounding ownership.